Hello there, and welcome to our third episode of Quiz to Whiz, brought to you by myself, Susie Bowen, your technical account manager and resident farm animal expert.
And I am Tim Aiken, solutions engineer and bird watching extraordinaire.
Oh, that's so true. Love a good bird watch. And this third episode, it's a fun one for us. We both absolutely love the topic that we're going to be talking about, and it's always fun for us to try out new things in this area. So, yeah, excited to do this one with you guys. As a reminder, we always are looking for new ideas. You don't want us to just come up with things on our own. We'll get in trouble that way. So if you have any good ideas, or just really want to learn something, or you just want us to build something for you, send those in. We've got the instructions at the end. But yeah, would love to hear your thoughts and ideas. So with that, let's just dig straight into this. We have a tendency of going super long, so we're going to try to keep this one a little bit shorter today. So let's dig straight into it. Susie, what do you say?
I mean, you're Susie.
Oh, that's true. Tim, what do you say?
I say great, Susie.
Cool.
Obviously, Tim and I need to come up with new ideas each time that we have these recordings. So here we are. All right, so our question right now is, I have recurring tasks that I'd like to automate with a workflow. How can I set up the workflow to automatically notify me when it's time to redo it? Or can I schedule workflows to be automatically assigned? The answer to both of those is yes, or yes, you can set it up. And how can you schedule them? We're going to talk about that. So we're going to specifically talk about a couple of different areas, expiration of workflows versus scheduling and launching workflows. There's quite a bit of overlap, but we'll go through each individual idea here, and we'll break out the expiration a little bit. And we'll kind of do some demos and walk through exactly what we want to show you.
Yeah, that's right. And the cool part is, all of this is using within Qualtrics one feature called expiration. So you can kind of finagle, for lack of a better word, the expiration feature to do lots of different things. And so we're going to try to walk through all of those ideas with you guys today. So on to scenario number one. The first one, which is just the straight up easiest way to do it, is using a workflow definition expiration to reopen a closed instance of a workflow. Okay, so using just the definition itself and opening instances that have already been completed. And to do that, let's just jump in. Let's jump in to a Qualtrics system, and let's look at our workflow definition settings. And I'm going to go into this one. I've pre-made these workflows, both Susie and I did. So, or Tim and I guess, we pre-built all these workflows. So we're not going to show you specifically how to build them. We're just going to pay attention to one area today, which is all right here in the workflow definition settings. So
and the biggest thing, I'm just going to throw in there, the biggest thing here with the expiration that we're talking about is purely just expiring one instance over and over and over again. So you have the option to add, subform fields or rows or additional information, but you're technically either not caring about the historical information or caring about the historical information, but recognizing that you could be overwriting that historical information under certain conditions. So just want to make it really clear that in this particular example, we're talking about same instance over and over again.
Yeah. And we'll try to show what it's going to be like to interact with them as well. Hopefully we can do that. We haven't actually practiced that, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, so in this first example, using definition expiration, which is right here, to reopen a single closed instance. And the one that the two that we're going to pay attention to are going to be these first two. We'll talk about this one in a second, but setting up on the definition a expiration frequency It can either be a date or a time frame. You guys are used to doing that in documents, so it's nothing new here. But essentially, if we're looking at equipment maintenance, for this one, we're saying every 7 days, I need to re-perform the instance of the task that I already completed. Okay, so that's set up here. On the fields themselves, you'll see that we just have a few basic things. We've got instrument details, and then we have this subform that's going to come in at the next step when we enter the actual detail information. We're going to input data into that subfield. Into the subform. What the subform allows us to do is add rows every time the instance reopens, right? So I enter it the first time, I close it. Per the settings, after 7 days, I'm going to get that same instance I've already completed back out. I will update the subform with a new row and add new details into it. Now, if you weren't using a subform, let's just say you were using a basic text field, I would enter the text, close it. After 7 days, it gives it back to me with that field with the text in it, right? So then I either add additional text or overwrite the data. And that's what Susie was mentioning before, is you got to pay attention to how you want to interact with it and what, how you're going to capture the data on the back end.
And if we go back to the workflow definition settings real fast, I think it's important to point out that the step expires to a particular, we're saying where we're going to have that expire. So when this workflow closes out, and then hits that 7 days that we've got set up, we're telling it to reopen at the second step in this process. It will not allow you to choose the first step. So just keep that in mind, that the first step is going to be used just for that information that will never change for whatever this is. So in the equipment maintenance example, that might be serial number of the piece of equipment or something that's going to be static the life of that equipment. And then you can also select the number of expirations if you wanted, to say it's going to expire every 7 days, but only for a certain period of time, or it's going to expire every 1 month for 12 months. So there would be, number of expirations would be 12, and then it's going to automatically stop. But 0 here equals infinity. So that means that you're going to be able to, you're just going to continue to expire, and there's not really a way for it to end in this particular case.
Nope, not without deleting the instance.
Not without, or the, if the instance or the definition, and starting with a different definition if you didn't want to use that anymore. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
All right. So how this all looks, right? We've got our first step where we enter details. Second step where we enter the actual maintenance item. We close it. Expires after 7 days, brings us back to maintenance, and then we close it again, updating the file. So, oh shoot, I forgot to put it online. Typical mistake.
Typical
Let's do
Susie.
that real quick. Typical Susie, I know, always forgetting. So put it back online. Let's go see. You guys are going to be pretty used to what this looks like, but I just want to show you that update step. So here's that workflow. You'll see the static information that Tim was mentioning earlier. We've got our GCMS. We've got a manufacturer. I don't even know if Thermo makes GCMSs. I bet they do.
I think so.
Model number, serial number, location, right? Yours would say whatever you wanted it to say. And then we move on to the step where we're actually going to, do our maintenance, right? And so with the subform, we can add this in today. We'll just say we expect it to pass. It passed. That was within range. You could attach your documentation, and we'll mark who did it. And my name's not in that list, so I'm going to pick Ryan. Now, what's going to happen is, of course, based on that setting we set, I'll mark this complete. Let me just do that.
Type of maintenance is required.
Oh, of course it is. Where was that? Oh, right there. PM. So close it out. That's all done. And it's going to sit in that, in its closed state until we hit that 7 days. And you could see it by just running a quick report on that. you'll see our expiration date is right there. Now, once it hits 823, it's going to kick it back out. Everything will be filled out just the same, but I could add a new row to my subform, add 823, my results, all of that information, and close it again, right? So then you're just updating the field within one instance, which is, it's pretty beneficial, right? Your instrument will have one record for all of its maintenance tasks, which would be pretty sweet. Anything else you want to add there, Susie? Or you feel like that's,
no, I think that's
about covers that?
I think that's good, and we can move on to our next scenario. So the second scenario is very similar to the first one in that we're still using the definition to set this workflow expiration, but it is actually based on a custom date field instead of the static date that we were talking about before, like a set frequency or a time of year. So the difference here being, well, there's a couple of differences that we'll kind of look at. We'll go into the product now, but a couple of the differences that we're going to be looking at are, thanks, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go into the same workflow here that we were looking at previously, where we're still going to focus on the same area that we were looking at before, in this expiration area. But the difference here is we're going to use this last radio option where it expires based on a particular date. So the difference here is that, one, you're using a custom date. So you're going to be able to, in the workflow itself, say when, go ahead and say this, but you're going to say when this needs to expire rather than, a date and time ahead of time. You're going to set this within the workflow instance. So there's going to be a field in here for saying when the date of the next maintenance is due. And then based on that date, you're going to put that date in the instance, and then that's what's going to drive the expiration. So based on the change in that date, this workflow is going to reopen. It's still going to open to the second step in the process. You still have the option to set the number of expirations, but it's essentially going to this particular very specific date. Now, what you can do in the workflow instance itself, unlike the expiration that we were looking at previously, if you zero out this date, so you delete in the workflow instance the date that's in here, it will stop the expiration process from happening. So instead of with like the other one where we were talking about, you'd have to essentially delete the workflow instance. In this case, you can say, maybe it's out of service. So you want to just stop this thing from expiring. You would zero out the date of the next maintenance. So if we go back to anything on here before we switch over, Tim?
I would switch the that expires based on it needs to be the date of next maintenance field.
Thank
you. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's, one of the benefits to this, not just on maintenance. Well, you could see it on maintenance with things like a calibration that like an external vendor did. If you brought them in and they're saying that your next one needs to be done, March 20th of 2025, you could input that data in that field and you wouldn't have to worry about this definition here, right? With trying to figure out how to set up the workflow itself to do that. So that can be a big benefit. Also, things like certificates that you're getting from outside vendors, if they have an expiration date on them, you could input that into the workflow and it will drive the expiration instead of the definition. So pretty helpful.
Just like with documents, this is going to expire on the date that you've got entered in here. So if you did have something where, this is a set date that this thing expires, but you actually need to redo or the calibration, for example, by a particular date, you don't want it to be reminding you for the first time on that date. So you might actually have a date that's a set period of time before that actual expiration. So instead of date of next maintenance, it might be date of reminder for next maintenance, and you have another one that's specifically for the date of the maintenance expiration. So just a way that you can use this field or a couple of different fields to keep track of the actual date that something is going to expire versus the time frame you want to be reminded about it.
Yeah, sometimes you'll hear us refer to those as like a trigger date within a workflow, because you might want, like she said, you might want the record of the actual date to be maintained. You won't want to have to change that over time. So you can leave that and then have a trigger that, tells you beforehand that this thing is approaching. So yeah, super beneficial.
Yeah. So now I put that one online. So now if we go into the workflows and run through an instance of this and make some selections. So I'm just going to pick some stuff. And we'll fill all this out. And then we'll enter our data. So just like with the other example, you're going to be filling out your data for the first time that you do this. And again, we'll pick Ryan. And so it might be a good idea to have either and or your out of service instructions and your date of next maintenance maybe highlighted with some HTML, something to kind of make these pop, because it's important that you have some, something actually in here. Let me make that, yeah. So that it's really obvious that you need to put this date in, because if you leave this step without putting that date in, then it will not expire. But you cannot make it, kind of a little tip, you can't make it required. In the case where you do want to be able to let it go out of service, you wouldn't be able to make it required if you only had the one route, because then it's going to require that you fill in a date. And the whole point is that you want that to be empty. So you could have different routes, wow, rates, routes, whatever that word is, to then have different rules on that. But just saying that if you're going to have it going to the close step for expiration, you want to make sure that that's really called out. So we'll go ahead and enter that. And just like with the other one, it's going to close that workflow instance out. We take a look at it again, and you can see the expiration is set to the date that I selected of when this expires the next time. So again, you would add a row the next time. So on 9/3, you fill out that information, and then for the next maintenance, that could be whatever date you want, or you delete it and push it forward to close out the workflow.
Yeah, and the cool thing with both of these options is interacting with the workflow itself is almost identical, right? All you're doing is filling out your information and adding rows every time you do a task, or updating field values every time you get a task. But it just depends on how you want the expiration to work, right? Is it through that custom field value with the date of next maintenance, right? Are we going to let that drive it? Or is it a set frequency every single time, right? Is it always 7 days for this task every single time we do it? If so, just set it up on the definition and let it drive it there. So pretty cool. Anything else you want to add there, Susie? You feel pretty good?
That's
cool.
Good, yeah.
Cool. Well, let's jump out of that and back into scenario 3 then. And now for scenario 3, we're going to talk about scheduling workflow instances to occur automatically. So instead of where we've been talking about before, we go in, we launch a workflow, we complete the task, it closes, and then we set up expiration to reopen an instance. Here, we're just going to give users instances on a frequency when you want them to complete the task. So it's proactive. It can have some information filled out automatically, but we're just saying, every so often I want to give somebody that task to do, they complete it and close it. So to do that, let's go back to our call track system. And I'm going to go to my workflow settings, and doing this requires 2 workflows this time. So the first thing you're going to build is your basic equipment maintenance workflow, or whatever task that you need them to do. That workflow is going to have one very specific thing, and that's no expiration tied to it. Okay, this is what is capturing data. It captures all of the equipment maintenance details. It does it all in one step. You'll see that here. Everything is viewable and editable here, and then we just complete the record. This automation we'll talk about in a second, but really you just need those top 2, or those 2 steps there. But key feature, no expiration on this workflow.
Otherwise, you're going to have an infinite number of workflow instances that you don't want. So make sure that you only have expiration on the scheduler.
Yeah, you will be incredibly confused. If you set it up here and on this other workflow, you'll be very confused. So don't do it. Just remember the one that you're capturing details on, no expiration. Now, what we do need is a second workflow that drives the frequency with which you get data. Okay, so that one's going to be right here. It's my scheduler. So I've got equipment maintenance scheduler and an equipment maintenance workflow there. Actually, let me put this back online while I'm here. And let's go back now to our scheduler. The scheduler workflow is where we set up the expiration. And the first way we're going to show you is just on a set frequency. So you'll see here, I've got it turned on. We've got 3 steps this time. One, a very first step where all we're doing is putting in some info about what you want. You could think of this like pre-filling out a form for your employee that tells them what you want them to do. In this case, I'm telling them which instrument, the manufacturer, model, serial number, location, the type of maintenance I want them to do. And I'm picking the person here with the personnel field who I'm going to give it to.
And remember that the fields in both workflows, when there's a launch involved, workflow launcher involved, that they are going to automatically copy from parent to child when they're the exact same fields. And that's going to be really useful for you here. We're going to show you how that's important, but you want to keep that in mind because it is going to copy over all of the fields that are in both of the workflows. So the scheduler workflow is really what's going to have your static information, the information that's not going to change, just kind of like our previous examples with the first step. That's really going to be your scheduler sort of taking over for that first step. And then the data is going into the equipment maintenance workflow, the main workflow that Tim was talking about before, where you're going to actually be putting the data.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. So like here is the main equipment maintenance workflow where we're capturing all the data, and here's the fields that where we capture them. Our scheduler has just the first 10 or so, however many that is. I can't count right now. I think it's 10. Has the first 10 of those, but not the others, right? So they have to be the exact same fields if you want them to copy. And you can you plainly see that here, just the exact same fields, one to the other. The second step is the automation. And what we're doing is, so we fill out information, we launch the workflow that we want to keep the records in, and I'm going to give it to the person that I selected. Now, when I do that, it's going to automatically, like Susie mentioned, it's going to automatically copy all of that data over to it and give it to me. Now, if we go back to our settings, what's going to happen is after 7 days, we're going to automatically expire, right? Because after the automation, it goes to close. So after 7 days, we're going to expire. It'll go back to automation, launch a new workflow, and close. Right? So once you do this the first time, I fill out that first bit of information for the instrument. It's going to then automatically do everything. You'll never touch it again. You fill it out once, never have to touch it again after that. Every 7 days, it's going to give you that task to do. So if you want to present them with the equipment maintenance workflow on Monday morning so they know to do it, you launch the first one on Monday. It'll give you that. And then every 7 days after that, it'll give you a brand new one, and just keep that frequency going. So I'm going to put it online.
In this particular case, it's actually giving you a new instance for that information that was filled out in the scheduler too. So anything that you had in that scheduler, you'd be potentially creating a new instance of that same information. So that's why it's also important to make sure that the fields you have filled out in that first step of the scheduler are the fields that you want to actually copy over to every instance. And that's why you don't want to be putting your actual recordings in there, because that's not going to be necessary for each individual instance.
Yeah, exactly. So with this one, let's go ahead and run this through so you can see what it's going to look like. Now, remember, the very first time that you do this, you run the scheduler, right? We don't ever need to individually run the maintenance workflow, right? The scheduler gives us those.
And you can even make it where you're responsible party for equipment maintenance, that the first step is like a fake person or like a dummy user or an administrator, so that people won't even see this in their workflow landing page as an option. The only thing they'll ever see is the scheduler, because you don't want them creating, standalone instances here. You want them to be creating them off of the scheduler.
Yeah, and in most cases too, I see where like a manager is the only person with access to the scheduler, because the other thing you don't want to do is run this more than once, because once you set it up to run, it will give you that every 7 days. So if I do it twice, I would get 2 every 7 days, right? So really paying attention to properties and permissions on the workflows is important here. And if you are new to us, we did a session on this. What was that, for episode 1? So if you have questions about how to hide workflows and the data, go check out that episode. So what does this look like? Here's the scheduler. You'll see what's happening. We're going to launch the equipment maintenance. I just pre-fill out whatever info I want. So I'm going to pick my Leica GCMS, which I know doesn't exist. And they don't make your glass. I know that they don't make that. Location, calibration required, sure. Type of maintenance, repair. Well, now we'll just do PM. PM is what you would schedule. And who am I going to give it to? I'm going to give it to myself. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it to myself, enter my details. This workflow is going to close. And in a second, once everything's done, I can just refresh my inbox and you'll see the brand new instance of equipment maintenance right there. So again, it'll immediately give you the first one. So all the data has copied over. I get that up here, and then I would enter in my maintenance details like this was, me doing it for the first time. Let me do that. I'm going to pretend I'm Ryan, status and service. And in this case, the data next maintenance doesn't really matter, right? The definition is driving this. It's saying every 7 days I'm giving it to you. So you wouldn't even need this field right here. So I'm going to ignore that, just put done and hit complete. So both of those workflows are now finished, right? If I go to my advanced here and I look at my scheduler, you'll see that I've got my instance. It's currently closed, but it's going to expire on the 23rd, right? And when it does that, it's going to expire to automation, immediately launch me an equipment maintenance workflow and give that to me to run. So I never need to edit this. I'll never interact with it again. I'll never have more than one of this. On the other workflow, which is here, this is where you'll find all of your records. Right, here's the one that I did. You'll see it doesn't have an expiration date. There's no expiration tied to it. But all of my details are here in this record. So I could click in there, see what I did, and see that it was all done. And over time, you'll just continuously add records to this page, right? As you get new ones, you'll just have a new one on the 23rd, a new one on the 30th. Can't do much more math after that. But you get the point. You'll just continuously every Monday get another record. So each instance is a new record of you doing maintenance. Anything I missed there, Susie?
No, I think that was perfect. So I think we're
Okay.
now just going to switch over to same situation, same kind of scenario, but we're just going to switch to using the actual field, the custom date field. So we'll go back into our workflows here.
Yeah, and we leave the complicated stuff for Susie because she's our product expert. So she's going to show you guys how to set all of this up.
Yes,
do the more
bratty.
Complicated version.
Very bratty. So with the scheduler, we're going to take this one offline, and we're going to change this from expiring every 7 days to expiring based on the date of next maintenance. And this is still going to work in the same way that it's going to launch the equipment maintenance workflow, but we're going to also do another thing here. Well, a couple of things. One in this workflow is, along with this automation, what we want to happen is we want to put a hold on this automation from launching the next one and until we actually have the date of next maintenance come up, because in this first workflow, or in this first step of the workflow, we're just going to be filling out that basic information. We're not going to be filling out the date of next maintenance. So if we walk through this kind of in our minds together just for a second, you're going to only be filling out this information. You're going to click the route button and you're going to move or have it launch to the next step. But the problem is then before it goes to close, we don't want to go into close immediately because we haven't set this date of next maintenance yet, which is the key to starting the new instance of the workflow. I don't know if I explained that very well, Tim, if you have a better way.
Yeah, no, exactly. We've launched, but we don't know what the date is yet, right? Because we haven't captured that. So we just want to hold this workflow, make sure it doesn't go anywhere until our other equipment maintenance, where we're capturing all the details, until it's complete. And so she's just adding that hold in here. We're doing it on the same step that you're doing the launch. So logically, you'll see the launch, and then it's just going to wait until it's completed to close out.
Essentially, we just do not want it to go to close, the scheduler to close, because if we haven't filled out the date yet, that's going to trigger the automate or the next expiration. If we haven't filled that in, what the system does, if the date is like in the past, then it's just going to immediately expire. So let's say I started this, like Tim did, and we had one that was done today, and then it expired on the 23rd. And we went into the instance on the 23rd. We filled in our information, but we weren't ready to move it forward yet. So it sat for a few days. Well, as soon as your scheduled tasks runs, if it didn't have this hold step on it, it would go to close, and then it would expire itself again, and pretty much immediately. So you wouldn't want that to happen, because then you'd have a whole bunch of just extra actions out there that weren't really real. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then we're also going to do another thing with the other workflow, the main workflow where we're putting all of the information in. It's also going to be key for us to take this equipment maintenance workflow and to make sure that we have this data copier. So Tim was talking about that before. We already had it built in, but we just kind of want to explain here that now this is really important, because when you fill out this information in this workflow, this is the workflow that's going to have that date of next maintenance in it. And we need this to copy back to that scheduler workflow to tell the scheduler workflow when to actually launch the new instance, or expire rather, to launch the new instance.
Yeah, so, and this, I was just going to say, this type of setup, it's designed for kind of the most flexibility that you could ever need, right? Every single time it expires, it's based off of a custom date. Sometimes that's great, right? If you have like, if what you're getting comes from a vendor, if it's like a calibration packet, this can be great, because you can use the scheduler to still run it and give it to you on an automated fashion and present you with new instances. But you're allowed to put in the date when it's going to come back to you. If you want that flexibility, then you'll need these extra bits of automation in, right? I'll need to copy the data back to my scheduler to update and then close it out.
Yeah. So now we walk through this. It's going to look really exactly the same as before, but we'll start with the scheduler again to get this process kind of off and running. Just going to pick some.
Now you can pick a Leica.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
I don't know the models.
I don't either.
Blah, blah, blah. And our fun locations. Maybe we should have had some things that weren't actually.
Yeah, it works.
Assigned. All right. All right, so we're going to enter our details, and just like before, this is going to nearly immediately schedule or create that first instance for us. So we'll go ahead and just give it a couple of seconds to do its thing behind the scenes, and we'll refresh. And there it is in our inbox. So this is the first time that we're entering our information. So we're going to select our date that it was performed, all the same stuff that we had before. And now this is where this is going to become be very important. So we're going to need to select the date of our next maintenance here, because this is what's going to trigger that expiration to happen. So now I'm going to say the maintenance is complete.
And also, if you don't put anything there, it will not ever expire again.
Yeah. So if we look again at, like we were looking at these instances before, we can see that the scheduler is set to expire now on 9/10, and this happened behind the scenes. This would have been blank at the beginning, but because the data copier happened pretty much immediately in the child workflow here, and we can just open this to look at it. But in the main workflow where we entered our data, it is now closed because that whole instance was entered and closed out of the scheduler. The launched one is where we initially entered this information, and because of data copier, it copied this back to the parent that launched it. And we don't even have, I think in the first step of this workflow, we didn't even include this. So it is just available in the close step because we just want to be able to view it. We don't want to be able to make any changes to it. But technically you could make a change here if you needed to after the fact, but I would advise against that because then your two workflow instances are no longer in sync. So that might cause some problems, but that is possible.
It does bring up an interesting point. We get the question a lot of how could I reopen a closed instance? This is the only way to do that is through expiration. And so if you ever feel like you could use or benefit from reopening a closed instance, you could build expiration off of a date field that you never enter and keep it editable here at close. And then, if you ever needed to open it, you could fill it in for today. Once it runs that checker, it'll give you the workflow back and let you edit. But that's a side step. I don't know why I thought about that, but you could have fun with it if you wanted to.
And so just taking this one kind of full circle, what's going to happen is on 9/10, it's going to go through the expiration and it's going to launch a new instance of the workflow. So when I get to that instance that it launched, I can just leave this blank if I don't want it to expire anymore. And that might be where you say that this particular instrument or whatever it might be is pointing to the wrong thing, but this particular instrument with this serial number is no longer in service. That might be a good reason for it. You've completely taken it out of service. Same thing with You can do this also with like employee information too. So like, CVs or anything that education or training that you might want to update for your employees. And if the employee leaves the organization for whatever reason, then you might want to just say they've been offboarded, and then you can delete the date so it doesn't continue to expire.
Yeah, and another thing, I don't know if we mentioned this yet or not. It could have just been that I didn't pay attention, which I apologize if I did. But if so, when you fill this out the first time, you're filling out the scheduler. The date isn't included, and then when you do the task, you'll say, I want to do this again on 9/10. When it expires, that 9/10 date is still going to be there, right? And you said that you could clear it out if you wanted to close it. If you want to keep it open and expire again, you have to update that date field.
Yes.
If you don't, it will immediately expire and give you another one, right? Because you didn't update it to a date past when it expired. So this one does require a little bit of extra work just to make sure that people are updating those date fields when they need to be updated. But yeah, you could highlight it with some HTML if you want to make sure that somebody really gets in there and does it.
Yeah, I think making sure that you have instructions in here, and the right people are trained maybe on this process, so they understand the importance of filling in that date of next maintenance, really all the information in here is pretty important, but making sure that if they did have something where it was out of service, then they don't really want to have the date of maintenance also filled in because it's still going to expire again.
Cool. Well, hopefully that wasn't super confusing. I know that's a lot of data to kind of go over and a lot of scenarios all kind of around the same topic. The main takeaway is you're just playing with expiration on both of these. It's do I want an individual definition or an individual instance to expire? Cool. You can set that up on the workflow. Do I want to proactively give it to them? Then you just build another workflow to kind of kick those off and shoot them out. But either way, we can accomplish that and have some fun with it. So, cool. Good job there, Susie. Great
job, Tim.
All right, so let's go back to our slide. And I do want to make sure that you guys know how to get in touch with us if you have ideas for other topics, if you have questions or concerns about anything you saw. Hopefully not concerns, that would be bad. But if you have questions about what Susie and I showed you, reach out to us. We would love some topic ideas. So if there's something you want to see, something you want us to build or try out, let us know. We'd be glad to do it.
We'd also love to hear your feedback too. So, are these helpful to you? I think that it'd be really nice just for us to kind of hear from our people out there. And if these are, useful, if you guys are finding some value out of these recordings, if they're too dry, if, we're being too silly, whatever. But, we'd love to hear your feedback just on what we are choosing to do and how we are accomplishing it.
Yeah, all the negative feedback, just send it to Susie's email address and she'll take care of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks again, Susie. Always a pleasure to hang out with you. Always fun.
It's a pleasure. It's true. Yep.
Yeah, and we'll see you all next time if they renew us for episode 4. So we'll see.
That's right.
But thanks, everyone.
Yet. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.